much. There's going to be a lot of us, so we're trying to keep everyone's mic muted while the speakers discuss at the beginning, but we're going to have ample time for Q&A after. So that is awesome. If we have a bunch of people, if you feel like saying where you're joining from on the chat, that would be lovely to see, just to get a sense where everybody's coming from today. Just while we're waiting. Oh, Ullapool, I've been there. That is such a wonderful place. We've got people from Scotland. I think we have people from over a dozen countries here today. So thank you all so much for joining. Nairobi, amazing. I'm currently in France. I think our speakers are all in different countries too. And that is one of the beauties of Ecocide law, is how international scope it is, which we're going to talk about. So Libya, amazing. Hi, everyone. So we're just going to give it one more minute for everybody to join in. In the meantime, I'll introduce myself. I'm Laura. I'll be moderating the session today. I run ONA, which is a communication agency dedicated exclusively to ocean conservation. So we're very lucky to be moderating this panel today. Switzerland, England, Brilliant. Okay, so the way we're going to run things is each speaker is going to go through a short introduction, because we understand that ecocide is probably a word you've heard, but not a concept that a lot of people have a deep understanding on. So we're going to start with Antoinette, who's going to walk us through why ecocide is important in the context of ocean conservation, where are we at currently in ocean conservation efforts and needs. Then we're going to have the brilliant Jojo discuss what ecocide law actually is. And finally, last but not least, Anna von Riebe, who's going to talk more as a lawyer herself, from the front lines of legal protection of the oceans, about examples of such work. And so I think, amazing, Canada, welcome everybody. So I think without further ado, I'm just going to introduce our first speaker, Antoinette Vermeil, who is the co-founder of the Gallifrey Foundation in Switzerland, and someone who's on the front lines of ocean conservation and has a very holistic take on how a lot of these issues intersect, and I think why ecocide is so relevant. So I'm going to mute myself and we'll let Antoinette take it on.
Hi there, good afternoon, good morning. I think even good evening to some people, but so lovely to see so many people. I'm going to just come in and describe how I went from being just a normal person living their life in cities, not understanding much, to where I am now, and that journey, because I think along the way, many of you will be at those different places at some point. So just a few basic facts which always alarm me. So we're going to start off with the scary parts. Just some facts and figures. Each year we extract the weight of China's human population in fishes annually. And basically we discard 40% of that as bycatch before it even reaches land. So given the subject, we can now start seeing some links. Fishing capacity has increased exponentially over the last 30 years, although only 10 nations are really responsible for 90% of that catch. But the problem is that it's mostly legal. I mean, you can put feasibly 1,000 vessels on and fish 24/7 in certain parts of the ocean. Nothing we can do about it. And so while we can sit there and say that, you know, fishing fleets in China or whatever, there's so many, actually they're not the most rapacious and unscrupulous, and those tend to belong to fleets in certain EU countries. So we're left with a point now where fishes have nowhere to rest, reproduce, respite, anything. They're just being, you know, chased. That it's literally fishes in a barrel. In addition to that, just to give you another idea, because I know certain members of our audience here, shark populations, which I consider the lions of our ocean, have decreased by 90% over the last 30 years. And that's due to an increased demand for fins and livers and byproducts such as cheap meat. You know, I often say, if this was a business model, would you let your resources get to 90%, you know, reduced by 90%? In the same vein, you know, we are fishing for krill, for salmon farming aquaculture, which in itself is even a problem. And what it does, it deprives existing marine creatures who rely on that as a food source, particularly when you have a series of stressors. So you'll have things like seals and whales and penguins who have to go further afield to find what it is they're looking for. And because of warming oceans, krill productivity is not as good. It's a carbon sink. So there are many areas that we, take one keystone species out and things start to, I call it the big game of ocean Jenga. So the
Mm.
ocean is not an infinite pit.
Sorry to butt in, Antoinette. I was wondering if you were meaning to share slides.
Not yet.
Okay, good.
Thank
Just
you then.
no, of course.
So what I wanted to show today, this is to show how ecocide law is not only able to protect our ocean, but it's essential. It's an essential tool, and it was one that really has opened to my eyes about it. And I am now going to the slide and hoping that this works. No, it didn't. Okay, forget it. Okay, so basically, what happened was in August 2020, this is an image of the Galapagos Islands in the Ecuadorian EEZ. And you could see in there, that was actually 365 Chinese squid jiggers. And basically what they were doing was they were standing in the swimway and basically anytime fishes from either side went through, they were getting them. And that was the point when I realized, oh my gosh, the ocean is not it's vulnerable. And so what actually has happened is, if you look at this is the actual area that is protected by different laws. So all the pale blue are EEZ zones or EEZ zones. They're the zones that extend out 200 nautical miles per country, and obviously they're islands with dots. But everything that's blue is the high seas. Okay, so I thought, oh well, Greasy, it's high seas, but no, it's the high seas and it's the EEZs. So if you try and protect something on the high seas, it doesn't necessarily work per country, or vice versa. So I realized, and this is my image to show what I think of ocean law these days. It's kind of the way we cut up a cow, and I hate doing that in the first place, but this is even worse. Then we now have the reality, and this is what it is I can protect something, I can protect a whale, but it doesn't necessarily apply in all those other areas. I can protect the top of the ocean, but I can't protect the seabed. I can protect a region. So these are the things that have made me realize that we've got this piecemeal section of legal things. And it made me realize that this thing, it's not good enough. And just some examples, FAO, a while back, a single country succeeded in removing nature-based solutions from any application. You also have the WTO, all the subsidies, which have been going on for 20 years to finish, to stop harmful subsidies, 20 years more of killing huge amounts of creatures with abandon. Also, the other problem is, despite pressure to reduce fishing subsidies in the EU, it continually supports more fishing subsidies. So that's currently the state of the ocean. I often say ocean laws are not watertight. And that is why I believe there are many tools there, but we actually need a belt and braces, or even one standalone. And so Ecocide can help cut through much of this, and it can be a support to other main laws to protect the ocean. The campaign for the rights of the ocean is very much the other side of the coin, in the same way that as a human I have a right to live, to thrive, as opposed to homicide law, which is a deterrent as well as a penalty. So that's kind of my quick overview. I'm going to stop sharing now. That's sort of given you that little overview, and I'm going to pass you now back to Laura. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much, Antoinette. I think that gave us a very clear idea of why, as you say, current situation is far from ideal, and why existing regulation it is not enough for the urgency of the issue and the scale of the issue, and to explain what.
I think we've lost Laura. So I'll quickly go ahead and introduce Jojo. who can actually give the whole detail of what ecocide law is and its traction. Thank you.
Hello there. Hi. Yeah, I'm sure Laura will rejoin us. But yeah, thank you for that intro, Antoinette. And perhaps I'll just give a bit of a sense of what we mean when we talk about ecocide law. What we're essentially looking for, and our organisation, Stop Ecocide International, works globally towards this, both at the sort of diplomatic, political level, but also within civil society in a very kind of, cross-feeding kind of way, is basically the recognition of mass damage and destruction of nature, or ecocide, as a crime, and as a serious crime. And it may be people often respond and say, well, haven't we got lots of environmental laws? And yes, of course we have. And of course, as Antoinette's just shown, in the context of the ocean, there are certain zones of the ocean, certain areas where there are plenty of regulations that apply. But what we don't have is particularly good enforcement. We also have a very kind of piecemeal following of those regulations, and they're often not well monitored. And what we would say is that there's a kind of fundamental issue at play here, which is a cultural issue, and that's something that's sort of arisen over the last, really couple of 100 years or more. But effectively, the economic system that dominates the globe currently, which obviously comes from the Western canon of thought, it just separates humans from nature in a very fundamental way. So we don't kind of really clock our complete interdependence, our complete dependence upon nature, but our kind of reciprocal relationship with the natural world around us. I mean, obviously, we do treat nature as resources. We have to eat, we have to make homes, etc. But what we've lost is any sense of balance around that, or indeed any sense of how detrimental it is even to human civilization to continue to do that. We already kind of know, at least intellectually, we know that we are sort of sawing off the branch we're sitting on in terms of our industrial approach. But it's interesting, and why I say it's a cultural issue is that you can know all of that intellectually, but actually our society doesn't behave as if it understands that. And one of the points of intervention that can actually change this, we believe, is law, and in particular it's having a law which creates a sort of foundation. So just to give a quick comparison, if working in human rights, at least that mass murder, torture, all of these things are deeply serious crimes, but there's no actual equivalent in the environmental space. So there's a big body of kind of very specific laws, but there's nothing that fundamentally says you do this level of damage, it's bad, wrong, dangerous, and should be a crime. Now this is a conversation that is growing very fast. About 4.5 to 5 years ago, there were no governments talking about criminalising or recognising it. That has changed drastically over the last few years. And we now have a situation where it's a live discussion in at least 35 countries. And recently, just last month, the EU Commission, Council and Parliament came to agreement on including cases in the Directive, the revised Environmental Crimes Directive. And I'll come back to that because there's some specific relationships with how good that would be in the ocean context, the way that they've done it. But it is nonetheless a massive step in the right direction. And there is also a very live conversation at the International Criminal Court, because ultimately what we aim for is an international crime. So it's to add ecocide alongside genocide, war crimes against humanity, so that effectively it's listed at the place which is supposed to address the crimes of most serious concern to the international community. And we believe ecocide absolutely belongs there. There are some people who respond by saying, well, how can you say this is like genocide? Now, obviously, in terms of the intent, is very different. The genocidal criminal, you have to intend to destroy a people. With ecocide, it doesn't work like that. It's a crime of recklessness. Effectively, you knew this was the effect that you would create, but you decided you did it anyway, even if it wasn't your ultimate aim. So that's the kind of overall kind of picture of what's intended by it. And just to give a bit of a sense of what perhaps the most important milestone, or a couple of important milestones. One was obviously the bringing of this conversation onto the diplomatic table, and we actually have a great ocean state, thank for that, which is the Pacific Island Republic of Vanuatu, which is very much at the forefront of innovations and taking legal avenues and avenues in international law to address climate and ecological crisis. And they actually called in 2019 for all member states of the International Criminal Court to consider the addition of ecocide as a fifth international crime. But probably the biggest milestone in all of this has been the creation of a definition of ecocide as an international crime. And that was created in 2021. Now, there have been various lawyers over the decades since the first use of ecocide should be a crime and it should look like this. But in order to have a level of credibility where there's been an uptake of conversation at the government level, which is very much what's happening now, has emerged from the foundation convened. They spent 6 months at the beginning of 2021 working out a definition between 12 top lawyers from around the world, all with sort of different legal backgrounds and different ideologies, and therefore what emerged was a real consensus. I'll show you this definition briefly because it's actually, you should see it if I close my video. There it is. So it's ecocide means unlawful the environment being caused by those acts. So the key things about that are, and there are a couple of really key ones, particularly in relation to the ocean. So firstly, it doesn't focus on specific acts. It doesn't say if you do X, you are committing ecocide. It says if you do anything and it creates X result, you are committing ecocide. Now, the important thing about that is, as a kind of general offence, if you like, is that it doesn't firstly, it doesn't target a particular industry or sector, which is useful politically, but the most important thing is that what it doesn't do is give people something that they have to avoid in order to somehow sort of slip out of responsibility. So what for example, I'll give the example of the recent EU decision. Actually, it's great that they've actually increased this idea of severe penalties for severe harms. But what they've done is at the moment they've left it as a list, quite a long list, but a list of particular actions. And of course, within moments really of this announcement, we immediately started getting questions. Well, will it apply to this? Will it apply to that? And for example, it doesn't at the moment apply within the context of fishing, but there are there may be other ways that that can be approached in Europe. But the point is that if you actually do make a standalone crime of ecocide, you can then effectively have it refer to any activity that creates that result. And a very obvious parallel is, if someone commits murder, it's the fact that the person ends up dead that defines it as murder, not how they did it. So effectively, it's that same principle, if you like, that we're looking for with ecocide, and that we're also advocating for at the international level. In terms of the ocean, particularly, as you can imagine, that's particularly relevant because if you list certain acts, you're going to potentially have something that goes out of date rather quickly and might not cover some things that many people in this call might want it to cover, for example. And so what we would say from an advocacy perspective is that anybody who happens to be EU based, because of course EU countries are going to need to harmonise with this new directive, is that we would encourage in the individual states, when they harmonise, to generalise the offence, precisely for the reasons that I've just outlined, because we also want it to be future-proof. We want it to be, ready for whatever ecocidal nonsense somebody dreams up in the next few years. So we don't want it to go out of date. Another aspect that is important, needing to be we already find a lot of regulation. There's actually a lot of illegal fishing, for example, that goes on, or different kinds of ways that damage the ocean ecosystems that are already in breach of regulation. So the unlawful bit will straight away, catch those kinds of things. One aspect is also important and particularly important with the ocean, because what that refers to is, even if what you're doing is, at least in theory, permitted, if the damage that you are creating is disproportionate to the benefit you're providing in the world. And that doesn't mean the profit for the person, that means the actual social and economic benefits. So if that's disproportionate, then it could still come under a category of ecocide. And that's going to be very important for either jurisdictions that don't have as much protection in law already, or potentially in areas beyond national jurisdictions. So those two things are quite important. Although, of course, when you're outside of national jurisdictions, you can still look at prosecutions where the flag in the country of the flag country of a vessel, or indeed, as I understand it, potentially if you're talking about specific pieces of equipment being used in certain ways, you could also potentially look at the country where that equipment originates or is manufactured. So there are a number of different ways that this could potentially reach situations that are legally reachable with existing laws. So effectively you're trying to kind of contain that colander, if you like. I think that's probably enough to start off with, so I'll leave it there for now, but obviously looking forward to questions and discussion. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Georgia. That was like a great introduction, and I feel like now we're all wondering what that looks like on the front lines, and also what is the perspective from practicing lawyers on this. And that is why we have Dr. Anna Ribe, the founder of Ocean Vision Legal, who's going to walk us through these more legal, practical perspective on the issue.
Hello, and thank you for this kind introduction. My name is Anna van Riebe. I am a lawyer and founder of Ocean Vision Legal, the first law firm that entirely specializes on marine protection. So to me, it is an honor today to actually have the opportunity to talk with you a little bit of how this looks like in the legal practice. Like, we're hearing so much definition, and that sounds all good, but like from a legal perspective, how can we put that into practice? So I'm going to share a few slides with you, and after that, we will have a lot of time to just discuss and to ask any questions. So write down whatever you want to know, and then we can go into that. So, as I said, I'm a lawyer in Germany, and I think everywhere legal studies can be quite lengthy. So I studied law for about, I think, 28 semesters. And in that time, we often have the opportunity, or luckily, we also have the opportunity to really understand why we have laws. And this is important because so many times in my lawsuits in court, actually understanding the rationale of a law informs my argument and really helps me to bring a compelling, convincing argument. So when I looked at Ecocide, the first thing that I asked myself is, why do we actually have laws? What is the function of laws, of law? So laws give order in social interactions. They orderly resolute conflict. They solve, like, for the resolution of an orderly resolution of conflicts. And also, importantly, they protect the individuals from attacks by other people or by the state. Now, when we apply that to nature, what has been developing over the last years is a framework to give nature its own rights. So rights of nature means recognizing that also the nature has intrinsic values, which we must protect from attacks from humans or the state. So such as people have the rights, nature has these rights as well. And we recognize that nature is not just a resource for humans, but has its own value. Okay, and then we can get even more specific because ecocide is a criminal law. So why do we have criminal laws? And the function of criminal laws is actually twofold. One, very obviously, punishment. So it serves for the retribution of injustice. But a second and very equally important function of criminal law is the prevention, because the punishment exists to deter a potential offender from even committing the crime. So we have two functions. One is the retribution, but the other one is really the deterrent and the prevention of the crime. So ecocide means, as Jojo already shared with us, and the definition is also in the chat, is to recognize the unlawful or wanton acts that damage the environment, and that these acts are illegal and must be punished or prevented. So when we look at this, I think it becomes quite apparent that rights of nature and ecocide both actually really have some, really aim for an ethical shift in values, because it really responds to how humans interact with nature. It acknowledges both. They serve to acknowledge the intrinsic value of ecosystems and our responsibility towards them. So it is the recognition that humans are responsible to protect nature in the name of current and future generations. Or a wonderful quote that I actually think is quite beautiful. It acknowledges that rights originate where existence originate. That which determines existence determines right. So we move away from this function, from nature as a resource, towards recognizing just from the intrinsic value, it has rights that must be protected. So then that's beautiful. And I think an ethical value also informs the rights. But how and if does this paradigm shift in ethical values, is that actually also implementable in the legal practice? In order to answer that question, I prepared two examples, two very opposing examples, so stay tuned. The first example is the so-called War in the Federal Constitutional Court case. This is a case that happened in 2019. It was a case in Germany, and PETA, the NGO, brought a constitutional complaint because there was an extension of the deadline that actually male piglets were castrated without anesthesia. And the aim that PETA had was that they wanted that the piglets sue themselves and ask for damages, so a form of ecocide, like asking for a punishment for doing that. So they wanted to create a precedence in which the male piglets reprimand the violation of their own rights and ask for damages. The Constitutional Court rejected the claim because it said animals cannot assert their own rights. Only people and organizations can assert violations on behalf of the animal, and there is no crime that the animal itself can reprimand. Because the crime does not give rights to the animal cannot go into court and ask for them. So the case was dismissed. Turning to the second example, very different. So the second example plays in Ecuador. And in order to understand the Ecuadorian case, we need to have a quick look at the law. So the Constitution of Ecuador is special because it's one of the few constitutions that actually recognizes rights of nature. And in Article 71 of the Constitution of Ecuador, it reads that nature, or Pachamama, where life is reproduced and occurs, has the right to integral respect for its existence and for the maintenance and regeneration of its life cycles, structure, functions, and evolutionary processes. All persons, communities, peoples, and nations can call upon public authorities to enforce the right of nature. Article 71, nature has the right to be restored. Accompanying these rights of nature, most importantly, Ecuador also has an ecocide law and its integral organic penal code. Under Article 247, where offenses against wild flora and fauna are illegal. So how does that look in practice? Following, I'm going to introduce the Ecuadorian shark fishing case. In 2017, a Chinese fishing vessel was found with over 6,000 dead sharks in their vessel in the area of the Galapagos Marine Reserve. This infringed various rights, including the Galapagos Marine Reserve Act, but also the rights of nature and the ecocide law that we just looked at. The Ecuadorian Supreme Court, in its judgment, in its verdict, then actually held the crew, the captain and its crew, liable and sentenced them to a penalty of more than $6 million and 1 year imprisonment. So just to let that sink in, because that's ecocide. So the reason why, the reason that the court gave was that nature, as a subject of rights, is entitled to complete reparation from the crime. And the amount necessary as compensation depends on both material and immaterial damages caused. So we see beautifully and very, very obviously the two differences of having an ecocide law and not having an ecocide law. Whereas once the claim was just dismissed because there is no legal basis, and the other time it was actually that there was a real fine of penalty of $6 million and 1 year of imprisonment. So benefits of ecocide law in practice. It gives effect to the legal obligation to protect and restore nature, because this is what actually makes it enforceable. The penalties, for example, we can also think about what would we do with the penalties, the $6 million. They could, for example, directly flow into a conservation fund that then helps to restore nature and to better protect nature. There can be principles such as in dubio pro natura. Most of us heard the sentence in dubio pro reo, which is one of the fundamental principles in criminal law, because criminal law is the biggest infringement on a person's freedoms rights, because you can actually take them away and put a person into prison, which is why there must always be a doubt in favor of the person, because other than in other rights where the judge can decide, in criminal law you can actually be put in prison. So there could be a case, there could be a principle like in dubio pro natura, like really things that really make it helpful to save the environment. And what becomes most obvious to me is how ecocide is really, it can lead to a punishment. But first and foremost, and in my opinion, what it really does is that it prevents the infringement of rights. So rights of nature and ecocide, to me, very much are two sides of the same coin. Because think of it, Jojo mentioned it before already, I think. When we think of the right to life, my right to life is actually being protected because the crime of murder is a crime. But that does not mean that if somebody kills me, they get punished. It actually means that a person might be deterred to even kill me because he or she knows that if he or she does so, need to go to jail. And exactly like that, like the right to life is being given effect and the violation of the right to life is being prevented by the crime of murder, the rights of nature are protected and being given effect, and the violation of them is prevented by recognizing ecocide. So looking at this, we can very much see how much practical influence it really has in the real world out there. So it's a prevention of committing ecocide that ecocide really does, to me, in my opinion. I'm very happy now to turn to our questions and answers session. Thank you so much for your attention. Here are contact details. Please feel free to shoot me an email or address me if you have specific questions. But besides that, I think we are very happy now to open this up, and I'm giving back to Laura, I think. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Anna. I think I'm just going to do a little recap because I think it's been amazing. I think we've learned from Antoinette why, obviously, what you guys already know, but it's really important to remember the way we're treating the oceans is completely unsustainable. Legal protection is not what it should be, and how urgent it is that we advance the cause of ecocide. We learned from Jojo why actually ecocide is gaining much faster momentum than I think a lot of us thought or knew. all the way from Vanuatu to the European Union. This is not a hypothetical nice to have. This is very much something that is tangible, and a lot of very credible people are standing behind. And then from Anna, how this fits into the wider conversation of nature rights, ocean rights in general, and what it looks like in very practical cases. I think cases that we could all start to relate to and think of in our own geographical context. So because of that, actually, we did ask before the call, even if you had questions, and we got a lot of submissions. So we're going to divide this Q&A in two parts. It will still have a good half an hour. I'm going to start reading some of the calls, some of the questions that people submitted ahead of time to give a chance to the panel to answer now directly. And then with the remaining of the time, I'm going to open it up, and maybe we can do also a little bit of Q&A by people just unmuting themselves and sharing. I think a lot of the initial questions that people have submitted may already be the one you have in mind. So we're just going to go through those first. The first one that we had, which is a very common one, is how can we ensure that governments comply with this law in the mandatory sense? So maybe Jojo, this one would be one for you.
Yeah. I think I'll just start by saying that obviously state sovereignty is kind of the highest autonomy that human groups or societies have. So it's not at the moment possible to force a country to adopt ecocide law. But one of the reasons that we aim for the International Criminal Court is that countries that ratify there will normally include in their own domestic legislation. And of course, as I've said, from the direction of the EU, we are seeing a concrete legislative direction of travel, which will become more and more compelling as more people join it. There are also ways to reach offenders from non-signatory states in a number of different circumstances. For example, under universal jurisdiction, any ratified state could arrest an ecocide criminal. But also, for example, if there is some connection between the perpetrator or their company or their victims, or perhaps even their operational offices, with a country that does have the law, then ways that be opened as a case. And I'll just give a small example of that. For example, Myanmar is not a member state of the case was nonetheless taken because the Rohingya refugees were in Bangladesh, and Bangladesh was a signatory country. And of course, if an act is wanton, it may be able to be prosecuted even if it's outside existing jurisdictions. So there's not a perfect answer, but there's actually quite a lot more applicability than might initially seem to be the case.
Amazing. I think the second question is, how can ecocide law ensure environmental and climate justice and a just transition? How does climate justice interplay with this? Maybe Antoinette, you have something to say on this?
I suppose in the same way, it's the same way that the anthropocentric laws that we've had have been exclusive of ecosystems. The whole point of this is that the peoples who have actually been managing the 4% of the planet that have been looking after 80% of the biodiversity, clearly that would be part of this, because indigenous custodians of our biodiversity and our ecosystems, it just makes sense that those will go in. I suppose in the end, and maybe Jojo or Anna can come in, it would depend on each case. But this is where the interest is. This is where the fun really begins, as they say.
Yeah, I'd add to that one of the key points about criminalizing ecocide is that what you're potentially doing, and certainly you're doing it at the ICC level, is aiming it at individuals rather than. Obviously, it'd be great also to make companies responsible and governments responsible, but actually, there's a particular level of deterrence that comes with the individual decision makers, and also that kind of the aim of the international crimes is to go to the sort of person at the highest level of responsibility. And that's quite interesting in terms of the climate justice question, because although ecocidal activities may often happen in developing countries or some of the least developed countries even, the decisions that lead to those ecocidal practices are quite often taken in the wealthy north. So there's also a kind of a potential rebalancing there, where the responsibility can be traced to where it actually sits.
That is, yeah, I think that is such an important point. The third question is very tangible, and I really appreciate it, is about what are the important pieces of litigation that are ongoing or soon to be decided that are important and that we should be keeping an eye out for. Maybe, Anna, you're a bit more abreast of the specific piece of litigation.
Well, with regards to that, three cases, or better, advisory opinions immediately come to mind, because there are actually 3 advisory opinions pending at the moment at international courts. They are all to different international courts. So we have one advisory opinion from the Commission of Small Island States to the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, which is on the states, the responsibilities of states under the obligation to protect and preserve the marine environment with regards to climate change. So this actually has a specific ocean protection, marine protection angle, because it refers to the responsibilities of states with regard to climate change, but from a law of the sea perspective, from the perspective of the obligation of states to protect and preserve the marine environment. The second advisory opinion, and this is the advisory opinion that we probably will hear at the, first, because they already had the oral hearings this September. And I was just at a meeting with the judges from ITLAS in Seoul in November, and they're quite keen to be the first ones to bring that out. So I'm thinking early next year will be the time that we hear this advisory opinion. The second one is an advisory opinion from Colombia and Chile to the Inter-American Court of Human Rights on climate emergency and human rights. And the third one is an advisory opinion to the International Court of Human Rights led by Vanuatu on the state's obligations and legal consequences related to climate change. So what we see, all of these 3 advisory opinions relate to climate change, and only one of them really specifically refers to the ocean. But because the ocean is one of the biggest regulators of the climate, they will all have an influence on ocean rights and ocean protection. And there is not yet a specific legal action that only concerns ocean protection, but I'm very convinced and certain that we will see a lot of them coming very soon. I call it ocean litigation.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much for all those details. The second question, which I think is one that we all ask ourselves when considering this, is what are recommendations on actions we can take at an individual level, in addition to signing petitions and sharing with our networks? Any pages, individuals, organizations we should be following? Antoinette is the master campaigner in my book. So what are some of those actions that people can be taking to make a difference at an individual level?
So it's an interesting one, because I started off with this frustration that, you hear these terrible things happening and you go, well, what the hell can I do? I'm just so-and-so. And so basically what I have realized, and we have brainstormed and brain jammed about this over many years with many people, is how do you connect to people who are not necessarily connected with the ocean but have a huge impact on it indirectly? So I think it's stories, whatever we're talking about. I actually did a podcast a year ago, and a woman came up to me about 2 months ago and said, I listened to you and I said I'll never eat fish again. And I was like, one done, 799 millions of people to go. But the point is, what can we do as individuals? So some of us are really involved in this sphere and in different areas, and others are basically people who are passionate about the ocean. So I would always say I'm always grateful for shares and signing of these petitions and these letters. They are really important, and it may seem overwhelming nowadays, but actually some people do listen. If we can move the needle that way, that is showing that there is a swell of opinion behind that view. The other thing is that we've developed, and we'll be posting them shortly, are talking points. How do you talk to your family? How do you talk to your boss, to whoever you want to start influencing? But we have to bring in the story of Ecocide. It is that conversation, it being out there, that is gaining the traction. And Jojo has been working at this, and she's really, now this is becoming much more mainstream. People are going, oh, I know about that. And they're starting to pay attention to it. The other thing I think that is really important is our connections. We are all connected, and it's amazing who we do or don't know who might be able to, at the very end, get to the point of actually talking or convincing a policymaker to take this to the next level. And at that point, we reach out to Jojo or to Anna or to the Stop Ecocide International team, and they can help guide this to the next level, because that's what they're brilliant of. Any other ideas from Anna and Jojo?
I think the conversation thing is really the fundamental one, in the sense that politicians don't like to be the first to a party. They like to feel safe in a conversation. So the more people are talking about this, the faster it goes. And we would say that also the way that you talk about something is also really important. I mean, the way that we approach this has always been, it's actually never been finger pointing. It's always been, this is inevitable. It makes complete sense. Of course, this is what's going to happen. And then of course, that has now transformed into, well, this is happening. Have a look over there. This has got, this is a direction of travel that's already established. And so it should be for all these reasons, and kind of basically keep it very positive. Ability of this law coming in, because it actually is already on the way. I think the other thing that's interesting is that it obviously those who have the close ear of legislators can often be those in the corporate world, and a way of portraying that is that actually this definition, which is currently the sort of basis of all of the law proposals that are being put forward around the world, is that it's firstly it's very concise, fits on the back of a business card, which is very, very good when you're dealing with a busy politician, but also it creates a framework. And I think in terms of giving people a sense of what they would need to look at in terms of their actual practices, given that this law is approaching, that's actually very important, because it actually steers people in the direction of concretely thinking about what they're doing and whether it's going to, innovative direction. So we found that that's been quite a powerful. The word ecocide has a certain internal momentum to it. It actually means, from the Greek and Latin, it means and actually just the word itself, using that word to describe the worst harms, I think is really important. And I think the other thing is to reassure people that this is not something aimed at citizens, end users, consumers. This is something that is aimed at decision makers at the highest level. And I think we've all had a lot of this sort of feeling guilty, because we're all guilty for all of everything that's happening, when in fact there are a relatively small number of key actors at the top in industry and government who have the most influence and who this could reach.
Amazing. I think that answers. We had another question about the importance of awareness campaigns. I think you all addressed it. I'm gonna pick a question that we had on the chat from Nigel, who is a lawyer and has lots of questions, but the main one being, how are funds currently being raised for pending litigation claims and class actions, and are third-party litigation funders getting involved? Basically, who's paying? Good. So I know maybe Jojo and Anna have something to add on it.
Well, I exclusively work together with NGOs and philanthropists. So this is the funding that I work. So I'm a law firm. Ocean Vision is a classic law firm, but in a way we act like an NGO, because we actually do fundraising. We do not work together with companies. And so we do classic fundraising, working together with NGOs, working together with Antoinette and her amazing Gelly Roy Foundation, and relying on philanthropic funding.
That's very helpful. Do you have any pro bono lawyers in support?
Well, what I do is mostly pro bono lectures and education. So because I strongly feel that in this current time, we have so many young people who are motivated and who are really looking for ways, like, how can I contribute? How can I go? And with Ocean Vision Legal being the first law firm, I mean, get that worldwide to specialize in marine protection, that really shows we need more of that. But also it shows that there is no perspective yet. There is no career path that for that yet. Like, people don't have it on the radar. The law of the sea professors, they all tell me, like, it's so wonderful that you opened the law firm now, because I can send interns and I can tell my students actually that there is a career in that. So I do a lot of pro bono education on, like, lectures on universities. Of course, we also do pro bono cases, but at the same time, you can imagine that only advising with NGOs, our budget, like our hourly fee is nothing like the corporate lawyers' fees, but we can also not work completely for free because it's the only income that we have.
Last point, that's very helpful and very informative, and thank you. I would just say there's a huge resource as well with slightly older lawyers, if you will, globally, who would also want to seek to mentor or train or guide or support younger lawyers wanting to go into this, because it is a very, very critical mass that you're building here, and it's a very, very powerful tool. And the implementation jurisdictionally globally and the rollout globally, where it's coherently done, will have that impact, as you said, to negate the criminal activities and the mens rea or the actus reus, or whatever you want to talk about, where the people are held accountable for the actions that they have and face the consequences. Thank you.
I think that's amazing. Thank you so much for that. And I think there's, I remember speaking with the Captain Cornelison, a Sea Shepherd, who said to me, look, you get the law in place, we'll police it. And I feel like it's like, let's get the law in place, and then all these lawyers can really get their teeth into it. And so this, it's really a position. I mean, what we work on is the advocacy side of pushing the legislation. And the easiest way to sort of think of that is, to think about what the bad guys do. I mean, effectively, everybody knows that the oil industry employs lobbyists to influence legislation. But effectively, dare I say it, the side of the angels, there's a lot less awareness of how powerful that actually is. That advocacy work of, I mean, we do it with a lot fewer expensive dinners, but effectively getting the conversation into the right places is a real key to how fast this is moving forward. And knowing that there are potentially lawyers that can be effectively right behind that, saying, okay, well, we've seen it's been developed, this far in this place, let's start using it. And kind of working things, pushing things forward and creating, case law as this develops is just going to be so important. So thank you so much.
Amazing, both. I'm aware we only have a few minutes left, but I think there's another question on the chat that related to what you just said, Jojo, which was about how to go about advocating for this outside of the EU. So you talked about how the countries are beginning to acknowledge ecocide law, but we have a question from Zakie, who may be in Kenya, I'm not sure, but about how to work with other countries to embrace this legislation in the future. So anything specifically to that?
Yeah, we have definitely. We have quite a broad network of teams in many countries, including, and we've also got a regional coordinator in Africa. And it would be brilliant for those who are interested there to get in touch, to sort of get up to speed with how things are progressing in Africa. And I would say that actually, in Africa particularly, there's been a lot of interest in the crossover between human rights and ecocide law as well. So that can be another way in. And actually the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights has just come out quite strongly in favour of ecocide law. And certainly when it comes to coastal communities and those kinds of situations, there's a big relevance there. So that a lot of this is about thinking into which existing conversations can we insert this angle, this aspect of ecocide law.
Thank you so much. I'm seeing a lot of thank yous to the speakers on the comments. I just wanted to say that so that everybody seems really excited about the conversation. We will not get to every single question, but I wanted to say a couple very important things. First, thank you to everyone for joining. This is just the beginning of a very long, ongoing conversation that our speakers are very willing to continue to have. So if you do have follow-up questions for anyone on the team, you are welcome to pose them. I have questions also about whether we will share the recording. We will. Anna, people are requesting your slides, so I think she may be willing to do that too. You will get by email shortly. And I wanted to leave you also with a sense of a general call to action now that we have all better understood what ecocide means. The first one, obviously, is to continue to educate ourselves on the subject. And so for that, we have wonderful resources put together by Stop Ecocide and the Gallifrey Foundation. So I will now on the chat, drop a link to a page where you can learn more about how to take action. Many of you already have seen and signed the open letter because it was in the registration, but there's actively an open letter dedicated exclusively to promoting the advancement of ecocide law for the ocean. And that is, I'm also dropping the link on the chat for everyone to see. You can go and sign that. Thousands of people already have, and it does make a difference to build that social imperative that we need to draw in politicians from around the world to this. And obviously what we said, like sharing these resources with anyone else who you know may be interested, educating others, and continuing to feed those conversations is exactly what we need. As Jojo said, this is actually gaining a lot of momentum. So if you're looking to take action in a way that is both tangible, but actually also working, this is it. This is it for 2024. So I think we may still have time. Just wanted to make sure I got that out of the way, but I think we may still have time for one more question. And I wouldn't want to leave anyone behind. So I guess I will add one on what are the options for communities to hold legal, for example, there was an example of fish farm companies, of local communities. What are the options for them to be holding those people accountable, and how does Ecocide play into that at a grassroots level? So maybe Anna, you may want to touch on that before we say goodbye.
Sure. It is a little bit difficult to give an one size fits all answer to that, because every law and every jurisdiction is different. So it really requires to get in touch with maybe environmental lawyers from your country and really brainstorm together a strategy. But what I do want to stress is, and where also Ecocide comes into play, is this Ecocide movement is on the international level. And whereas states basically have their sovereign equality granted under the United Nations Charter, which leads to their sovereign, gives them their sovereign rights to either consent or not to consent to a treaty, and they don't have to submit themselves under an obligation. When they do so, when states do consent to an international treaty, this becomes binding upon them. And that this does not only apply in the high seas, but then also in their territorial sea and in their exclusive economic zone. So while the jurisdictions in every country are different, and you need to look at that, there are also these international obligations such as, or rights and crimes such as ecocide, that then apply to that country nonetheless. So
I mean,
sorry,
that was perfect. I think everyone is so interested. I'm getting even more thinkers on the chat that I will sneak in one last question. I think this may also be for you, Anna. How does this apply to marine protected areas? I know marine protected areas touch on a lot of our work as ocean keepers. So any last thoughts on that before we let it go?
No, marine protected areas is my favorite. That's what I wrote my doctorate about. So anytime. So this relates to marine protected areas because we have a huge problem with the designation of marine protected areas. So when we look at the current state of marine protected areas, there are 2% of the oceans currently protected, of which only 2.4% are fully protected, so that there is like no take zones, no fishing, nothing allowed. The problem, one of the big problems is, we've already touched upon it, is that the designation of a marine protected area necessitates the consent of the state. So not all states do want to actually submit and limit their sovereign rights by accepting a marine protected area and not being allowed to fish in there anymore. How this relates to ecocide is, if there is a crime of ecocide, it does not matter if there's an NPA or not. If you go out there and wantonly or unlawfully harm the marine environment, you commit a crime. So it really does supplement so much. And it's filled so much the holes in effective marine protection that we have at the moment. So this is actually very, very important to, again, give effect to existing marine protection obligations and especially filling the gaps of where we don't have sufficient marine protection.
That is incredible, and we're right on time. So thank you again for everyone for attending. Thank you again to our amazing speakers. Just as a reminder, if you want to take action right away after this call, I am dropping again the letter you can sign. You can go to the link upstairs, well, up higher on the chat to learn more about this. And let's keep this conversation going. Reach out to the speakers if there's anything you think you can contribute or learn from this. And thanks again so much to everyone. You will be receiving both the recording and the slides in the next few days by email. Antoinette, any last words?
Thank you, and best wishes.
Best wishes.
Best wishes, everyone.
Great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye. Have a happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Happy holidays.
Thank you.